blasting holes, and suddenly they discover that there's a cavern already there. So they go down and explore what's going on there, and they find aliens. Dracos is what he would call them. So they're big, tall, reptilian-looking. They want our blood, and they eat our body parts. The reptilian ones, specifically. And the Greys help them get people. So the Greys help abduct people, usually children.
My message must continue. I'm doing it on my own money. And I'll continue to do it as long as it takes, as long as I've got to live. I've got cancer, I'm dying.
Throughout the 1990s, the Patriot movement was spreading rapidly through America as concerned citizens raised awareness about covert secret society influence and demanded truth, accountability, and freedom from their government. Prior to the widespread adoption of the internet, one of the primary ways patriots networked and spread their messages was by attending symposiums.
Our patriot movement in these United States is going to pick up the ball, and we are going to kick the parasites out.
One such tour, called the Preparedness Expo, featured an array of survivalists, freedom activists, authors, and whistleblowers. Featured speakers at the event mutually agreed that tyranny was rising in the West and that there was a larger agenda for a new world order. Some called for investigations into the Oklahoma City bombing and the first World Trade Center bombing as false flag events, while others warned the audience against various forms of high-level corruption. The Mockingbird media used predictable communist tactics to smear attendance of the Preparedness Expo events as white supremacists. This has been a preferred attack method used for at least a century to abate conservatives, preppers, and especially militia groups. In fact, it extended beyond just incessant slander in the media. COINTELPRO was a covert and illegal operation where the United States FBI infiltrated, discredited, surveilled, and disrupted various domestic political organizations. As we saw at the nation's capital on January 6th, COINTELPRO ostensibly ran from 1956 to 1971. But we have overwhelming evidence that it continues to the present, either in name or likeness. Beginning in 1995, a self-styled whistleblower named Phil Schneider spoke at several preparedness expos and shared his extraordinary testimony.
It's over $500 billion a year. Right now, there are 131 active deep underground military bases in the United States. There's 1,477 of them worldwide.
He described his experience as a government-contracted geologist, aerospace engineer, and structural engineer who spent 17 years building black-budget underground bases for the military. He claimed to have worked on bases at Area 51 and the S-4 facility at Groom Lake in the Nevada desert and also at Los Alamos in New Mexico. This was possible because of the Level 3 Rhyolite 38 security clearance that Schneider claimed he had. I worked in elusive occupations with Morrison Knudsen, Bechtel, Page Aerospace, ALA France, EG&G, and a host of others. Schneider, born April 23, 1947, knowingly risked his life by sharing this information and claimed that he expected to be killed eventually. If I ever commit suicide, I'll have been murdered. Nonetheless, he paid his own money to give more than 30 public presentations around the world. He asserted that by the mid-90s, more than $500 billion was being reallocated annually to secret projects dealing with extraterrestrial issues, and that 28% of the U.S. gross national product was being spent on the construction of these underground bases. Schneider also promised to give exact coordinates of every base in future lectures, and that he had already compiled a manuscript for a book which was close to publication. In August 1979, while drilling 3 exploratory shafts, the drills kept breaking and black soot began to emerge from 2 of those holes. This prompted Schneider to descend into the shaft in a protective suit. He carried with him a firearm in his hip holster. He claimed that his team had blasted into a city of sentient life forms, resembling the proverbial gray extraterrestrials, accompanied by an unbearable stench. Phil was met by a 7-foot-tall creature, and when another showed up, Schneider fired his weapon, killing one of them. Schneider was shot with some kind of plasma weapon, and claims that if it was not for a Green Beret soldier, he would have lost his life that day. According to his story, a battle then ensued with the life forms which led to the deaths of 66 Americans and NATO Delta Force soldiers. Schneider was prominently missing 2.5 fingers on his left hand, which he attributed to this incident. This would later become known as the Battle at Dulce Base. The underground city in Dulce was said to be between 400 and 500 years old. High-ranking officials in the military struck 4 treaties with these beings since their discovery earlier in the 20th century. In 1944, 1954, 1962, and in 1979, after the battle at Dulce Base. These treaties supposedly prevented war by exchanging humans for advanced technology. These gray extraterrestrials were permitted to abduct and experiment on humans as long as they provided MJ-12 with a list of their abductees. It was through his experience in black-budget programs, as well as the contacts he made, that Schneider eventually learned what the New World Order endgame looked like.
The alien agenda is the complete takeover of this planet, the killing off of 5, 6 to 7/8 of the world's population by the year 2029. U.S. military has known about this for 45 years. They've told no one. As far as I know, I'm the only person standing before a crowd talking about the alien agenda, secretively.
Schneider predicted that a one-world government would be established via a depopulation event in the 2020s, and that AIDS and other viruses were created as a form of population control. He also asserted that by the mid-90s, military technology was at least 1,200 years ahead of what the public knew about. Schneider claimed that 16 days before his first public appearance, he was attacked by someone he identified as an FBI agent. This man wounded Schneider's shoulder, but Schneider managed to kill him in self-defense. Schneider then reported the incident to the FBI, which bizarrely refused to follow up on the case. This incident was supposedly followed by 11 subsequent hits on his life. In addition to federal agents trying to forcibly kidnap his daughter, he claimed that 11 of his friends had been killed under mysterious circumstances, that they were all ruled suicides. Schneider gave his last lecture in November 1995 in Denver, Colorado. 2 months later, Phil Schneider made the ultimate sacrifice. His body was discovered in his Wilsonville apartment on January 17, 1996. The Oregonian and other local papers announced his death 2 days later. When we examine his death reports, we find disturbing evidence clearly indicating foul play and a botched investigation. At first, he was recorded as having died of natural causes, believed to be caused by a stroke, as noted on the police report. Deputy Officer McLeland was informed by the apartment manager that Schneider had not been seen in weeks. I smelled the odor of decaying flesh. I found the body of Mr. Schneider laying on the floor in his bedroom. The body was green and bloated and appeared to have been dead for 3 to 4 days. He was wearing underwear and appeared to have been getting out of bed and trying to get on his wheelchair. His face and upper body were laying against the seat of his wheelchair, and his feet and legs were on the floor. Although Deputy McLeland claims to have seen no signs of foul play, Schneider clearly had blood on his face and on the floor of his bedroom, as seen in pictures. Schneider also had rubber catheter tubing wrapped 3 times around his neck and tied tightly in a knot that Deputy McLeland claims he did not notice. His autopsy report, which was posted on January 25th, stated the official cause of death as asphyxiation by ligature strangulation. It's worth remembering that Schneider was left-handed and missing 2.5 fingers on his left hand. Deputy Medical Engineer Karen Gunson stated that the knot was tied very tightly and was hard to remove. Supposedly, his book manuscript and all the alien metals and artifacts that he accumulated from various deep underground military bases were missing. Deputy Officer McLeland called forensic examiner George Coleman, who was legally required to respond to the crime scene, but Coleman refused to arrive. Deputy McLeland claims he did not photograph the crime scene. However, Detective Kennel and Detective Harris did on January 19th, after the autopsy results came back, and their photos from the crime scene were eventually leaked to the internet. Many have pointed out that Schneider had easier and faster ways of committing suicide if he wanted to. For instance, he owned a gun and had 9 different prescription drugs in his apartment. However, his autopsy showed no detectable signs of medications. His blood and urine analysis were placed on a 3-month hold. It was declared that the samples would be preserved for 12 months when Phil's ex-wife, Cynthia Dreyer, requested more information after 11 months of waiting. She was informed that the blood and urine samples were, quote, missing and presumably destroyed. Cynthia told investigators about inexplicable experiences he would have, such as having dreams where he was shot by aliens, only to wake up with blood-stained sheets but no physical wounds. Mr. Schneider had a dream one time where he dreamt somebody had strangled him, and in the morning, when he got up, he had marks on his neck and bruising. On May 27, 2000, Cynthia wrote a lengthy testimonial articulating the reasons why she believed her ex-husband was murdered. One of those reasons was that he had cancer, and this was fueling him to survive as long as possible to warn as many people about the shadow government, which Phil openly discussed in his lectures.
The radioactive substance that I got hit with in 1979, late August of 79, it's a similar form of aplastic anemia. It affects your blood and your bones. My bones are extremely brittle right now. No cure. The government never told me about that, by the way.
Cynthia's public statement reveals that he was supposed to start a new lecture tour the day before his body was found. No suicide note was left behind. Police were disinterested that items were missing from his apartment and many other strange anomalies surrounding his death. With Phil Schneider's death came the birth of a controversial legend. Of the many prescient statements Schneider made in the 1990s, he certainly popularized some of the darkest conspiracy theories, many of which have since been corroborated with new evidence, such as the reality of elite human trafficking. Schneider also described the unbelievable practice of adrenochrome consumption as having a drug-like effect on extraterrestrials who consume it recreationally.
There are 9 races of alien populations that look at a human being as a bag of food. They're not cannibals. They don't eat the flesh and the bones and all that kind of stuff. They use the glandular secretions of animals and human beings as a mixture of the vitamins for their food. They get high off of our adrenal gland substances called adrenochrome.
Schneider followed these disturbing details by insisting that no one should take his word for it, but that with careful research, the public would be able to substantiate his claims. Schneider produced documentation demonstrating that he scored a 163 on an IQ test in high school, which would place him in the top 0.0013% of the population. He claimed to be able to speak 11 languages, and his ex-wife, Cynthia, confirmed this. He also produced documentation demonstrating that he had 2 social security numbers, one as a civilian, which was 544565500, and one as a government contractor, which was 544565600. Cynthia believes this was common practice in black budget programs. According to Phil's marriage license, he married Cynthia at 40 years old, meaning he had a roughly 20-year window after high school, during which time he could have worked in black budget programs. In an interview, Cynthia recounted more of the disturbing details that he shared with her.
Yeah, they derive one of their happy drugs from us. So when they frighten us and we get the adrenaline going, that's like a drug to them. But then they eat our blood.
Despite the documentation for several claims and the suspicious anomalies surrounding his death, there are many who dismiss the Phil Schneider case altogether. We will explore many of their arguments in Volume 2 of this series. Phil Schneider's story is highly polarizing, or at least that's how it appears when you research it. There seems to be a pattern among people who dismiss Phil Schneider, as they almost always do so with anger and derision. That's not to say they are wrong, but it's astonishing how many websites exist that are dedicated to only one thing: discrediting Phil Schneider and ridiculing anyone who takes it seriously. If his story is propaganda, you would expect it to propagate far and wide, but instead the exact opposite has happened. Finding any information on this case is extremely difficult, and nearly all the original photographs and documentation has vanished from the internet. Most websites that support Schneider are no longer accessible, except for those that have archived copies, and many copies are inaccessible. Is this more evidence of COINTELPRO running a psyop to tar and feather Schneider's supporters, or are they correct in labeling this man a fraud? Are deep underground military bases a reality? Is human-derived adrenochrome truly a resource for some reptilian extraterrestrials? Should humanity stay on guard for a depopulation event in the 2020s? Perhaps like Schneider's encounter at Dulce, the truth remains buried deep underground.
The black budget as we know it garners over $500 billion a year in secret money to build and keep building underground bases and the like. I think we could better use that money in the public sector. We could better use that money training people so that we could become more competitive in a more competitive world, rather than just freely hand it over to some government group who's just going to spend it on building underground bases. The average underground base, for instance, is 4.25 cubic miles hollowed out underground. A cubic mile is a mighty big space. What is the government trying to hide? Now, I can see a few of them built in case there's a nuclear war so that the president and a few of his entourage can escape. But when you're talking about 129 of these across the country, the size of the 48 states, I would have to say that this is not an exercise in prudence.